Hey everyone, it's Prof G again, and today we're going to be talking about the social history. I think the social history is one of the most interesting parts of the conversation that we have with our patient. It's kind of a little glimpse into their personal life, which can sometimes be, for patients, very difficult to share because some people have very private personal lives. But as a clinician, as a PA or whatever profession that you have, we have kind of a window of responsibility to kind of get a glimpse at someone's private life and how that might affect their overall health. So I think it is a very important part of the history. But it is also a very sensitive part of the history. So we have to make sure to approach it with professionalism and empathy. Okay. This video is a part of a series of videos I've been doing on the patient history. If you haven't checked out my other videos on the HPI, past medical history and family history, be sure to check those out probably before you watch this one because I like to go kind of in a sequential order. I will follow up this video with another on the review of systems and a few other ones trying to demonstrate the complete history. So stay tuned for those. All right, let's get to our cheat sheet. So, the social history usually falls in line right after the family history in the sequence of things. So, chief complaint, HPI, past medical history, family history, and then social history. Okay, sometimes the social history will precede the family history, but in most cases, it comes right after. All right, so we need a transition sentence. Thank you for sharing that family history with me. Now we're going to move into some more personal questions. And usually here is where I kind of preface this section. Some of the questions I might be asking you are a little more personal, but just remember that anything that you share with me will be kept confidential. And so, are you okay with proceeding? Yes, okay. You can either say this at the beginning of the social history or right before you start asking the more personal, sensitive questions. One other transition sentence, it depends how much time you have, really. Could be like, what is a typical day for you? Or, how do you stay busy? What kind of hobbies do you have? Anything to kind of start the conversation about themselves and kind of their daily lives. So it's nice to know stuff that's non-medical about your patients, especially if these are patients you're seeing on a regular basis, right? In the family medicine clinic. And that is because, when you know them more than just a patient, if you know them as a person, that PA patient bond can really relay a sense of caring that you have about them and about their well being, not just their medical problem. It really makes patients feel more comfortable. And overall, they're going to share more information with you, which is so important when you're trying to gather a history. It also gives you something to refer back to. So, like in my EMR system, when I was doing gastroenterology practice, I had like a box that I would make, and I would put in just like a fun fact or something that we talked about. Like, say for instance, if I talked to my patient and she told me that her daughter was at Harvard studying medicine, I would put that in my little box so that next time she comes through, I can be like, how's your daughter doing? How's medical school? And it just be like, wow, my PA is paying attention to me. She remembers these things about me. And it just makes that personal feel to your visit, which kind of takes it from, novice level to like expert level history taking and skills. Okay. Sorry, I got this little update. All right. So that being said, I like to find some sort of mnemonic, something we can write down on our quick scratch paper when we're walking in the room. And the mnemonic that I like to use is sad ones, and then shh, sad one, shh. Okay, it's kind of silly. The traditional one is sad ones, but I use sad ones with the shh so I can remember the other things that are on our practical checklist. All right, so let me go through what sad one stands for, and then we'll go through each one at a time. So I have it down here. So sad ones is smoking, alcohol, drugs, occupation, nutrition, exercise slash education, sexual history, support system, and home. Okay. And now I don't do them in this order. So really what I do when I'm writing on my scratch paper about to go in and I write it all down is I write it down as a placeholder. So I know I'm going to talk about smoking at one point. Once I talk about it, I'll put a check mark, but I don't necessarily go in this order. And I think you'll see why once I start explaining it. So let's go one by one. I usually like to start off my social history with me personally. I like to ask about their occupation. What do you do for a living? I feel like that's an easy question that can kind of get the ball rolling. You can also say something if we're going to talk about home. Tell me about your home life a little bit. Who do you live with? Where do you live? Right? And there's not really a set, you know, sequential order for the social history because I feel like it has to be more conversational. So like you can lead from one to another. So you start with, tell me about your home life. Do you live in a house or an apartment? Who lives with you, right? How many people live in the household? Would you consider them your support system? Then you're moving from home to support system. Yeah, okay. And if they say no, well, like who would you consider your support system? Do you have family, friends? Do you have a church group that you see? That kind of stuff, right? So that's more about social history that you can gather. Like I said, sometimes I start off with the occupation. If I start off with that, I'll say, what do you do for a living, right? And if they say that they are, on Wall Street and they trade stocks, I'll be like, wow, that sounds kind of stressful. Can you tell me a little more about it? And I might say, it's a very stressful job that they have to travel a lot. And that just gives me a lot of insight into what kind of life they live, right? Or what kind of job security they have. So from then I would probably say, where did you go to school, right? That could lead me into education. I could straight up ask, what is the highest degree of education you have, but it's kind of awkward, right? So you try to segue one to the other. And so trying to limit the awkwardness of the question, just like you're having a conversation with the patient. So, you went to university, what kind of degree do you have? Oh, I have a bachelor's, a master's. Or they might say, I didn't go to college, and that's totally fine. If they didn't go, so you could ask them what the highest level of schooling that they went to. You could also use that opportunity to ask them, reverse it about their occupation, right? So what do they do for a living, right? If they went straight from, growing up to a job and they didn't go off to school, right? You can ask them about that. You could also ask them about being employed or unemployed. I think you'll kind of gather that from the conversation you're having. Another thing to note is depending on their occupation, they might be exposed to certain things, right? So in the pulmonology module, we'll learn about silicosis or byssinosis or other coal miners disease, right? So if they have that type of occupation, you might pick up on some risk factors associated. Moving on, you might say, well, that your job sounds pretty demanding. When do you find what kind of diet do you have, or when do you find time to exercise, right? So you can kind of segue in. Well, I exercise this many times a day or whatever. So you want to kind of gather, do you exercise? If they don't exercise, how, what kind of physical activity do they have? Do they walk up the stairs at work? Do they take their dog for a walk, right? And so you want to know how many times a week and all that. And then from there you say, what kind of diet do you have? Do you find when, or you could also segue from their occupation to, do you take lunch to work, right? There's so many options here. And this one's really hard to kind of tell you this is how I would do it, because it really just depends on the answers I get back from my patient. But as far as nutrition, you kind of just want to gather, like, do they eat McDonald's every day, or do they meal prep? Do they eat more traditional meals where they eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Do they skip breakfast? That's the kind of things you want. Do they eat out a lot? Is their diet high in fat, cholesterol? You don't have to ask all of these questions, but just trying to gather kind of what kind of diet that they eat. You can also talk about maybe fiber consumption or water consumption, especially if the patient is like constipated, right? So that's this first page. These are some of the easier social history questions to ask. Okay. And then we move into some of the more personal ones. And that's why I like to kind of start easy, get them talking, get them opening up, and then we can move on to the more sensitive. If you hit the patient right off the bat with, are you sexually active? It's kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, we just met here, So anyways, I know it's all professional, and it's a matter of fact, we have to do this. This is how we best take care of our patients, but just ease them into it. That's my suggestion. So you might even wait to gain consent for sensitive material right before you start these. Okay. Now for the sensitive parts, I like to talk about smoking, alcohol, drug use, and sexual history. So with the smoking history, have you ever smoked, vaped, or chewed? Is kind of how I ask it. Because if you ask them, do you smoke? And they've only smoked in the past, they might not share it with you, right? If they chew tobacco but they don't smoke and you ask them, do you smoke? They won't share that with you. So I think the best way that I ask it is, have you ever smoked, vaped, or chewed tobacco? Okay. And so then if they've ever smoked cigarettes, how many packs per day? How many years did they smoke? If they quit, when did they quit? For documentation purposes, you'll want to calculate the pack years. And the pack years is the packs per day multiplied by the number of years. The pack years is widely accepted. So how many years they've smoked multiplied by the packs per day. Okay. So that's your pack year history. Then, there's other things. There's hookah, there's pipe, there's cigar, chewing tobacco. That should all be considered in smoking history. Some patients, when you start asking about smoking history, might start mentioning marijuana or up front because it's legalized in a lot of different places. But I like to, in my head, separate regular smoking tobacco, cigarettes, vaping, and chewing tobacco from drug use. So, but it's up to you. I also ask about alcohol. Do you drink? If they say yes, how much do you drink? How much would you say you drink? Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it socially? And we want to encourage them to be as specific as possible, because they may say, well, I have one drink every other day, or one drink a day. Okay, well, one drink could be like a shot. It could be a glass of wine. It could be a beer. It could be an entire bottle of vodka in one shot. I mean, I don't know. So you want to try to encourage them to be specific. In this, you want to try to be as non-judgmental as possible. Do not start judging your patients when they start opening up to you, because if you do, they will shut down right away. You're not going to get the information you want. Just listen, be approachable, and make your space with them a safe space to share. Okay. So you want to ascertain, though, throughout their sharing, do they seem to have some sort of dependence or maybe addiction, especially if they say, they drink on a daily basis, right? Or maybe they have a binge drinking issue where they say, I don't drink during the week, but on the weekends I drink 6-7 drinks a day. So if and only if you started getting the feeling that maybe they have a dependency issue, you could then impose the CAGE survey. The CAGE survey is the following. So first question would be, have you ever felt like you should cut down on your drinking? Have people like annoyed you by criticizing your drinking? Have you ever felt guilty about your drinking? Or have you ever had a drink the first thing when you wake up in the morning? If they answer yes to these, or a majority of these, then we should get them some sort of counseling on alcohol dependence. There are some trains of thought that say that educating your patient should be saved for the end of the visit after you've collected the history. I think there's varying opinions on this, and I think it's really whatever you're comfortable with. Sometimes if I tell myself I'm going to educate them on this, but I wait till the very end of the visit, by then I'll have forgotten. So sometimes I take advantage of the opportunity to do this. And when I educate my patients, I like to use a we, so that they don't feel singled out. I also like to try to word it in the most empathetic and non-judgmental way as possible. Sometimes when we drink more than one drink a day, that can be harmful to our health. And I like to use also some statistics. It's recommended that women drink one glass of alcohol per day. That's one small glass of wine, or one beer per day. Men, they recommend this. Just giving them recommendations that are science-based, it sounds less judgmental. So those are my my tips on talking about alcohol. It can be a very sensitive subject, and people can get very defensive, especially if they know some of it might be true. Okay. Moving on to drug use. So the way you word this also can be whether or not you get truthful information, right? So if I say, do you use any illegal drugs? What do you think? You think my patient is going to say, oh, yeah, sure, I do? No, right? You don't want to use the word illegal, right? Do you want to use the word, let's see, what other words can illicit drugs? Illicit also sounds kind of like taboo, like, oh, I don't know if I want to touch that. So I like to use the word recreational. Recreational sounds fun, right? Recreational sounds like no big deal, right? So I want a patient to be truthful with me. I don't want to minimize the amount of damage that drug use can have on someone's health, but at the same time, I want them to be truthful to me. So I say, do you use any recreational drugs? That's what I like to ask. And have you ever used any recreational drugs? And that'll spark the past, present drug use. And then also you want to ascertain any dependence or addiction. You want to, if they do say yes, what types of drugs, what settings did they use them in? And just you can remind them like, this is not meant to be judgmental. I'm just trying to identify some risk factors for diseases so that I can best take care of you. Okay. Then moving on to the sexual history. So remember, you can add this on to the reproductive history, or you can add the reproductive to the sexual history, whichever way you want to do it. Sometimes once I get started about contraception and fertility and pregnancies, sometimes it's just a little easier to couple that with sexual history, because to become pregnant, you have to be sexually active. So they kind of go hand in hand. The way that you can start this conversation would be like, are you sexually active? Now you have to ask that with a caveat, right? So I've actually had patients, usually the younger ones that maybe don't quite understand it as well. They'll say no. And so then my follow-up question to that is always, when was the last time you were sexually active? And then if they answer like, no, I've never been sexually active, then I know that I've clarified, they have not ever been sexually active. But sometimes I'll ask them, are you sexually active? They'll say no. And I said, I'll say, have you ever been sexually active? They'll say yes. Oh, when was the last time you were sexually active? Last week. So in my brain, that's pretty much still sexually active, but maybe for them it's not. So that's kind of the sequence of questions that I ask. Once they answer that, you can ask, how many partners do you have? Are they male, female, or both? Are you using any protection, right? And then so what types of protection are you using? And then I have here the type of sex. If you are really concerned about this stuff, then you can ask about that. Maybe you're seeing someone for something like that, then you need to ask more about the types of sex that they're engaging in. But by no means am I asking all these questions to all of my patients. And then again, pregnancies, if you haven't already addressed that in reproductive, you can address it here. And I like to ask patients, are you looking to get pregnant? And then consider talking about contraception at that time. There are a lot of different walks of life you're going to see. There's a lot of different religious involvement in sexual history. There's a lot of political involvement even in sexual history now. And so you have to come in it with an open mind. And the other thing that comes into play here is when partners come in together, because it can be quite awkward to ask your patient in front of their partner, how many sexual partners are you having, right? So there are circumstances in which you have to tailor the way you ask questions so that it is comfortable for the patient to answer, but yet you're still getting the right information. So just think about that. There's no cookie cutter way to ask this, but just keep those things in mind, right? You want to make sure that you're making your patient feel comfortable to answer the questions, okay? But one other thing, the flip side of that is just because someone is married does not mean that they don't have more than one partner. Just putting that out there. Anyways, we have covered our sad ones, smoking, alcohol, drugs, occupation, nutrition, exercise, education, sexual history, support system, and home. Remember, the social history is probably the one you have the most freedom to go around with. My recommendation would be that you write your sad ones down, And then as you're asking the questions, no matter which order you go in, you just check it off. So let's say you talk about nutrition first, because that's what came up. We talk about exercise next. Okay, but then we skip to the support system. Talk about that a little, segue that into the home life. And you see, you can just check them off your list. There's not one specific order. But again, I like to do my sensitive ones last after I've gotten my patient to open up a bit. So, anyways, I hope that this was helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to comment or ask below, or send me an email, right? I'm more than happy to answer. Some of these questions might be a little more sensitive. So that's it. We'll come back next time. Our next video will be over the review of systems, which should be really short because it's just pretty much yes or no questions. And then the last few videos will be on kind of putting everything together and doing a demo for y'all. So I'll see y'all soon. Have a great day.